She stood alone on the wooden platform of Silver Creek Station, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across weathered planks. The man who'd promised to marry her took one look, muttered something about false advertising, and walked away without a second glance. At 48, Martha Coleman felt the weight of rejection pressing down on her shoulders, heavier than all her worldly possessions packed in the trunk beside her. But someone else was watching too. From the shadowed corner of the station, Thomas Reed, a widowed rancher of 55, saw what the others missed: the quiet dignity in her bearing, the gentle strength in her demeanor, the hope still flickering in her eyes despite the cruel dismissal. Could a chance encounter at a dusty frontier station rewrite the ending of two lonely hearts? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Martha's fingers traced the worn handle of her carpet bag, her knuckles white with tension. The last train whistle echoed across the platform, a mocking reminder that there would be no easy retreat from this humiliation. Around her, the afternoon bustle of Silver Creek Station continued. Ladies in fine dresses averting their eyes, men tipping their hats down as they hurried past, all of them pretending not to notice the woman who'd been left standing alone, the man who was supposed to be. James Miller had already disappeared into the saloon across the street. His parting words still rang in her ears. Mail-order brides are supposed to be young things, not old maids. 20 years ago, those words might have brought tears. Now, they just settled into the familiar hollow space where disappointment lived. Thomas. Reed shifted his weight against the station's wooden post, his weathered boots scraping against rough planks. He'd come to pick up a package, seed catalogues for spring planting, but found himself unable to walk away. There was something in the way she held herself, straight-backed despite the whispers, chin lifted ever so slightly. It reminded him of Margaret in those final days, that same quiet strength that refused to bend. "Ma'am," he heard himself say, pushing away from his post. "Looks like you might need some assistance." The words came out before he'd fully formed the thought, surprising him as much as her. She turned, and Thomas saw what Miller had been too blind to notice. Intelligence in those brown eyes, character etched in the gentle lines of her face. Yes, she was older than the typical mail-order bride, but there was a beauty in her composure that outshone any young girl's fleeting charms. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I wouldn't want to trouble you." Her voice carried a hint of the East, cultured but not pretentious. "I'm sure I can arrange something suitable." "No trouble at all." Thomas gestured to her trunk. "I've got my wagon outside, and Silver Creek's hotel is on my way back to the ranch." He touched the brim of his hat. "Thomas Reed, ma'am. I run the Double R, just outside town." A moment's hesitation crossed her face, the careful calculation of a woman who'd learned to weigh kindness against caution. Then she nodded, her smile small but genuine. "Martha Coleman, and I would be grateful for the ride, Mr. Reed." As Thomas lifted her trunk into his wagon, he caught fragments of whispered conversations from the station platform. Can you imagine? At her age, Miller dodged quite the bullet. Desperate times. He noticed how Martha's shoulders stiffened at each comment, but her expression never wavered. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the mountains as they pulled away from the station, the wagon's wheels cutting familiar grooves in the dusty road. Neither spoke for the first mile, letting the rhythm of the horses' hooves fill the silence. It was Martha who finally broke it. "I should thank you, Mr. Reed. Not many would have offered help to—" She paused, searching for the right words. "To someone who needed it," Thomas finished simply. "Out here, ma'am, we all need help sooner or later, just a matter of being decent enough to offer it when we can." The Silver Creek Hotel loomed before them, its weather-beaten sign creaking in the evening breeze. Martha's heart sank at the sight of the women lounging on the porch, their painted faces and knowing smiles telling her everything she needed to know about the establishment's reputation. Thomas cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I should mention, this isn't the sort of place a lady should stay." He kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the reins. There's a boarding house in town, but Miss Randall, who runs it, well, she's particular about who she takes in, especially after any sort of town talk." The weight of her situation settled more firmly on Martha's shoulders. On rejection had quickly sprouted into a garden of closed doors. "I see," she said quietly. "I have a proposition, if you'll hear it." Thomas turned to face her fully now. "My ranch has a guest house. Nothing fancy, mind you, but clean and proper. It was built for my mother-in-law, though she never did come west to use it." Martha studied him carefully. "Mr. Reed, while I appreciate your kindness, I couldn't possibly—" "It's not charity," he interrupted, seeming to understand her pride. "Truth is, my daughter Sarah could use some company. She's 17 now, and since her mother passed—" He trailed off, pain flickering across his features. "Sometimes a house needs a woman's presence, even if just for a spell, while you sort out your arrangements." The mention of his daughter shifted something in Martha's perception. This wasn't some improper suggestion, but rather the careful consideration of a father thinking of his child. Still, she hesitated. "Your daughter might not welcome a stranger in her home." "Sarah's got a mother's sense about people," Thomas said, though a shadow crossed his face. "She'll understand." As they turned off the main road onto a narrower trail, Martha caught her first glimpse of the Double R Ranch. The main house stood solid and well-maintained, if modest, with a smaller structure set about 50 yards away. The guest house, she presumed. Between them lay a carefully tended garden, bright with late summer blooms. A girl appeared on the main house's porch. Sarah, undoubtedly. She had her father's straight bearing, but moved with a grace that must have come from her mother. Her expression shifted from welcome to wariness as she noticed Martha in the wagon. "Pa?" Sarah called out, her young voice carrying a note of question and something harder to define, perhaps fear that her father had made an impulsive decision in his loneliness. Thomas stepped down from the wagon, his movements careful and deliberate. "Sarah, this here is Mrs. Coleman. She's had some trouble with her arrangements in town, and I've offered her the guest house for a spell." Martha watched the silent conversation that passed between father and daughter. Sarah's raised eyebrow, Thomas's slight nod, the girl's eventual resignation. It spoke of deep trust, but also of old wounds still healing. "The guest house hasn't been opened in a while," Sarah said finally, her tone polite but reserved. "I'll need to air it out and make up the bed." "I'd be happy to help," Martha offered. But Sarah was already disappearing inside, screen door closing firmly behind her. Thomas sighed. "She'll come around. Sarah's got a good heart, just takes her time trusting folks. Lost her mother young. Just sick she was. Sometimes I think she's afraid to let anyone else in case they leave too." As they unloaded her trunk, Martha caught sight of her reflection in the guest house window. Travel-worn, yes, but still standing straight. She'd come west, seeking marriage, security, perhaps even love. Instead, she'd found rejection, judgment, and now this strange, fragile offer of temporary sanctuary. "Mr. Reed," she said as he fitted an old key into the lock, "I want you to know I don't take this kindness lightly. I'll find more permanent arrangements as soon as I can." Thomas paused, key turning in the lock. "Mrs. Coleman, out here we understand that sometimes life takes unexpected turns. All we can do is help each other navigate them with dignity." He pushed the door open, afternoon light spilling into the dusty interior. "Take whatever time you need." From the main house came the sound of Sarah moving about, drawers opening and closing, with perhaps more force than necessary. Martha squared her shoulders. She hadn't come west looking for charity, but perhaps what she'd found instead was something rarer, an opportunity to prove her worth, not just to a potential husband, but to herself. Martha woke to the sound of horses in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the guest house window, she watched Thomas and Sarah moving through their morning routine with practiced efficiency. Their synchronized movements spoke of years spent learning each other's rhythms, a father and daughter who'd built their world around the absence at its center. Later that morning, as Martha tidied the already clean guest house, she heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Sarah stood at the bottom of the steps, holding a basket of fresh eggs and vegetables. "Pa said to bring these over," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He thought you might want to make your own breakfast instead of coming to the main house." The consideration in the gesture touched Martha. "Thank you, Sarah. Would you like to come in for a moment?" Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "Got chores." But she lingered, eyes moving past Martha to study the interior. "You've arranged things different than they were. I hope that's all right. I just thought Ma had plans for this place." Sarah interrupted, drew them up special for Grandmother Reed, had everything mapped out, right down to where the teacups would sit. She touched the doorframe, fingers tracing old wood, but Grandmother never came. Said the West was too wild for her. "Taste." Ma died that winter before she could change her mind. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Martha understood then, this wasn't just any guest house, it was a museum of lost possibilities. "Your mother sounds like she was very particular about making a proper home," Martha said gently. She was proper about everything. Pride and loss mingled in Sarah's voice. "Pa says I'm just like her that way." With that, she turned and hurried back toward the main house, leaving Martha with a basket of fresh food and a deeper understanding of the ground she walked upon. Later that afternoon, Martha spotted Thomas in his study through the main house window, bent over what appeared to be account books. His furrowed brow and the way he kept running his hand through his graying hair suggested the numbers weren't adding up as he'd hoped. She was about to turn away when something caught her eye. A flash of gold on his desk, a wedding band, carefully placed beside a framed photograph. Even from this distance, Martha could make out the image of a beautiful young woman holding a small child, their smiles frozen in time. "You shouldn't stare." Sarah's voice made Martha jump. The girl had approached silently, arms full of fresh laundry. "He always gets like this when the banker's due to visit, and he always takes out Ma's things when he's worried." "I didn't mean to pry," Martha said quickly. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Pa's too proud to admit it, but the ranch isn't doing as well as it should. Ma used to handle the books. She went to school back east, knew all about numbers and such." There was a challenge in her voice, as if daring Martha to comment on a woman's education. "A valuable skill," Martha said carefully, thinking of her own experience managing accounts, though now wasn't the time to mention it. "Your father seems like a capable man." "Capable at ranching," Sarah corrected. "Ma always said there's more to running a business than just doing the work, but Pa—" She trailed off, loyalty warring with frustration. Just then, Thomas emerged from his study, tucking something into his vest pocket. The wedding band, Martha realized. He spotted them and nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Mrs. Coleman." "Sarah, I trust everything's satisfactory with the guest house." "More than satisfactory, Mr. Reed. I was just telling Sarah how grateful I am for your hospitality." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat, "we'll be heading into town tomorrow, if you'd like to join us. Might help you explore other opportunities." The offer was kind, but Martha heard the underlying message. This arrangement was temporary. She was a guest, nothing more. Yet something in Sarah's earlier words nagged at her, about the books, about business being more than just the work. That evening, as Martha prepared a simple supper in the guest house, she watched father and daughter cross the yard to the barn for evening chores. Thomas's shoulders carried the weight of more than just physical labor, and Sarah walked beside him like a shadow, trying to fill a space too large for her young frame. Martha touched her own bare ring finger, remembering different losses, different dreams. She'd come west seeking a fresh start, but perhaps what she'd found was something more complicated. A family haunted by the ghost of perfectionism, struggling to move forward while honoring the past. The trip into Silver Creek proved more illuminating than Martha had expected. While Thomas handled ranch business, she noticed how storekeepers greeted him, respect tinged with concern, the kind reserved for a good man facing hard times. More Telling were the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, and the way Vernon Hayes, the town's wealthy rancher, watched Thomas from the bank's doorway with calculating eyes. "Feed prices are up again," Thomas announced as they loaded supplies into the wagon. His voice was casual, but Martha caught the tension beneath it. "Might have to sell off some stock before winter." "Sell now, and you'll get half what they're worth," Martha found herself saying. At Thomas's surprised look, she added, "I couldn't help but notice the market reports posted outside the general store." Sarah, who'd been quietly arranging packages, looked up sharply. "She's right, Pa. Mr. Hayes's men were talking about it at church last Sunday. They're waiting for small ranchers to panic sell." Thomas's jaw tightened. Sometimes a hard decision now prevents worse ones later. "Unless," Martha ventured carefully, "there might be other solutions." When neither Thomas nor Sarah immediately dismissed her, she continued, "I noticed the livery stable's ledger open on the counter. They're paying premium for hay from Wyoming when the Abbott farm just outside town has fields full. Abbott and his wife don't speak to neighbors, let alone sell to them," Thomas said. But Mrs. Abbott was admiring Sarah's handiwork in the mercantile, that embroidery on her shawl. Martha nodded toward the girl. "Sometimes the best business deals start with a simple conversation." Later that afternoon, after Sarah's careful words to Mrs. Abbott had indeed led to a favorable deal on hay, Thomas found Martha on the guest house porch. "You have a good eye for business, Mrs. Coleman. I helped my father with his shipping company back east," she admitted, "before he lost everything in the panic of '93. After that, I learned even more about the importance of watching the numbers." Thomas seemed to wrestle with himself before speaking again. Might you be willing to look at some figures for me, just to offer an outside perspective?" Martha recognized what it cost him to ask. "Of course, Mr. Reed." The ranch's books, spread across Thomas's study desk that evening, told a story of honest work and mounting pressure. Martha saw how Thomas had mortgaged part of the land to keep the rest running, how rising costs ate away at narrow margins. But she also saw opportunity, better contracts waiting to be negotiated, inefficiencies that could be trimmed. "Your wife kept beautiful records," Martha said softly, noting Margaret's elegant handwriting in the older ledgers. "She did everything beautifully." Thomas's voice roughened. "I've tried to maintain her systems, but—" "Pa!" Sarah called from the doorway. "Mr. Hayes is riding up." Vernon Hayes filled the study doorway moments later, his expensive suit out of place among the ranch's practical furnishings. "Reed," he nodded, then turned calculating eyes on Martha. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Coleman is our guest," Thomas said simply. "Ah, yes, I heard about your arrival." Hayes's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I trust you're finding our little community welcoming?" "Very," Martha replied evenly, recognizing the kind of man Hayes was, the sort who mistook others' dignity for weakness. "Well then, Reed, about that offer we discussed," Hayes began, but Thomas cut him off. "Nothing's changed, Hayes. The double R isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, especially when the bank's getting anxious." Hayes's gaze drifted to the open ledgers. "Shame to see a good ranch run into the ground by inadequate management." Martha watched Thomas's hands clench, saw Sarah's face pale. Before she could stop herself, she said, "Curious definition of inadequate, Mr. Hayes, when the Double R's cattle bring higher prices at market than any other ranch in the territory." Hayes's head snapped toward her. "You seem well informed. For a guest, I make it my business to be informed, Mr. Hayes, just as I'm sure you made it your business to learn that the railroad's planning a new spur line through Silver Creek before you started buying up distressed properties." The silence that followed was absolute. Hayes recovered quickly, but not before Martha saw the flash of surprise in his eyes. "Good evening, Reed. Mrs. Coleman." He tipped his hat, but his smile had gained a predatory edge. "I'm sure we'll speak again soon." After he'd gone, Thomas turned to Martha. "The railroad, the surveyor's equipment I saw behind the freight office, and the way Hayes's men were studying maps in the saloon." Martha shrugged. "Details matter in business, Mr. Reed. Your wife understood that." "Yes," Thomas said slowly. She did. He looked at Martha with new eyes, as if truly seeing her for the first time. She certainly did. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by Hayes's personal messenger rather than the regular post. Martha watched from the guest house window as Thomas read it, his expression darkening like a gathering storm. When Sarah reached for the paper, he folded it quickly and tucked it away. "Nothing to worry about, daughter," he said. But his eyes met Martha's across the yard, and she understood the unspoken request. Later, in his study, Thomas handed her the letter without comment. The terms were clear enough. The bank was calling. In a portion of the ranch's loans early, citing market instability. The deadline was impossible, 30 days to raise funds that would take months to gather. "Hayes sits on the bank's board," Thomas said quietly. "He's squeezing us, trying to force a sale." Martha studied the document carefully. "This notice period is shorter than standard banking practice. Doesn't matter much if it's legal or not. Hayes has the bank in his pocket, and most of the town council too." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Martha had come to recognize as frustration warring with pride. "I won't let him take what Margaret and I built." The mention of his late wife hung in the air between them. Martha glanced at the wedding ring that still sat on his desk, its gold band catching the afternoon light. She thought of her own losses, the hard lessons learned in her father's failing business. "Mr. Reed," she said carefully, "I might have an idea, but you'll have to trust me." Before he could respond, Sarah burst into the study. "Pa, the hands found 2 dead cattle by the North Creek. Hayes's new fence cut them off from water." Thomas was on his feet instantly. "That fence is on our land. His men claim there was a mistake in the survey. They're out there right now, moving it even further in." Sarah's voice shook with anger. "They laughed when Miguel tried to stop them." Martha saw the muscles clench in Thomas's jaw. "Sarah, ride into town and fetch the sheriff." "Mrs. Coleman, I apologize, but—" "Go," Martha said firmly. "I'll check the property maps in your desk, find the original survey markers." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at how naturally she'd stepped into the crisis. He nodded once and strode out, Sarah already running for the stable. Alone in the study, Martha worked quickly. The property deeds were well organized, Margaret's influence again, and she soon found what she needed. But it was another document that caught her eye. A contract signed 15 years ago, granting water rights to all ranches along Silver Creek. When Thomas returned hours later, darkness had fallen. Martha heard the weariness in his bootsteps on the porch. "Sheriff claims his hands are tied," he reported, dropping heavily into his chair. "Says it's a civil matter. Need to let the lawyers sort it out." Meanwhile, Hayes's men are digging post. "Holds on Reedland." "Tell me something, Mr. Reed," Martha said, pushing the water rights contract across the desk. "Did Hayes ever file an official change to this agreement when he bought the Upper Valley Ranch last year?" Thomas frowned, reading the old document. "Don't believe so. Didn't seem important at the time, since he's upstream from us. But according to this, any modification to water access requires unanimous consent from all creekside ranchers." Martha allowed herself a small smile. Moving that fence without proper approval isn't just trespassing, it's violation of a binding water contract, one that predates Hayes's presence in Silver Creek. Thomas studied her with new intensity. "Hayes has better lawyers than we could ever afford, perhaps, but he also has investors back east. Investors who might not appreciate learning their money is tied up in property with disputed water rights." Martha met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes, Mr. Reed, the best defense isn't a head-on fight. It's knowing which pieces to move on the board." A long moment passed. Then Thomas did something Martha hadn't seen before. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. Margaret used to say something similar, called it her chess player's view of business. His eyes softened at the memory, but without the usual pain. "You remind me of her sometimes, Mrs. Coleman, not in looks or manner, but in the way you see beyond the obvious." The comparison could have been awkward, but Martha heard it for what it was. the highest compliment he knew how to give. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. Now shall we discuss how to make Mr. Hayes reconsider his tactics?" From the doorway came a small sound. They turned to find Sarah watching them, her expression complicated but no longer unwelcoming. The girl nodded once, as if confirming something to herself, then stepped into the study to join their planning. Outside, the night wind carried the promise of autumn, of change coming to more than just the seasons. The old recipe book lay unopened on the kitchen table between them, its leather cover cracked with age and stained with the evidence of years of use. Sarah's fingers hovered over it, not quite touching. "Ma wrote all her recipes in here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pa always said her apple pie could make angels weep." Martha sat quietly, letting the girl take her time. It had been Sarah's idea to invite her to the main house kitchen, though the reason remained unspoken. The invitation had come after Martha's help with Hayes's fence dispute, delivered with studied casualness over morning chores. "I've been thinking," Sarah continued, still not meeting Martha's eyes, "about Ma's pie. The harvest social's coming up, and Pa always gets this look when other ladies bring their pies, like he's remembering, 'Would you like to make one together?'" Martha offered gently. "Not to replace your mother's, but perhaps to honor her memory." Sarah finally looked up, suspicion warring with hope in her young face. "You wouldn't mind?" "I'd be honored." Martha smiled. "Though I should warn you, my own pie skills are decidedly earthbound, no angels involved." That earned her a small laugh, the first she'd heard from Sarah. The girl opened the recipe book carefully, and Martha caught glimpses of elegant handwriting, margin notes about weather affecting baking times, little drawings of flowers decorating the corners. As they gathered ingredients, Sarah gradually began to talk, sharing memories that seemed to surprise even her with their willingness to be voiced. "Ma used to sing while she baked. She taught me to crimp the edges just so. She always said cooking with love meant not counting the minutes, but watching for the perfect shade of golden brown." They worked together in the warm kitchen, afternoon sun painting everything in honey tones. Martha let Sarah take the lead, offering help only when needed. The girl's hands moved with familiar confidence through the motions her mother had taught her, muscle memory carrying her through the harder moments when words failed. "What was your mother like?" Sarah asked suddenly, up to her elbows in flour. The question caught Martha off guard. "She died when I was very young. I barely remember her." She paused, considering. "But I had my Aunt Rose. She taught me that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most." Sarah absorbed this, methodically cutting butter into flour. "Like you showed up for Pa with the Hayes problem?" "I suppose so," Martha said carefully. "Though your father and I are just—" "I'm not a child," Sarah interrupted, her movements becoming more vigorous. "I see things, like how Pa doesn't take out Ma's ring as often now, or how he looks at you when you're working on the books together." She stopped, knuckles white in the dough. "I don't know how to feel about that." Martha set down her rolling pin. "Sarah, look at me." She waited until the girl did. "Your mother will always be your father's first love, and your mama. Nothing and no one can change that. Not ever." "But things are changing anyway, aren't they?" Sarah's voice was small. "Life has a way of doing that," Martha acknowledged. "The trick is learning how to hold on to what matters, while still leaving room for new chapters to be written." They worked in silence for a while, the familiar motions of baking filling the space between words. When the pie finally went into the oven, Sarah surprised Martha by asking, "Would you tell me about running a shipping company? Pa says you're teaching him about contracts and such." Martha recognized the olive branch for what it was. As they waited for the pie to bake, she shared stories of her father's business, the lessons learned in both success and failure. Sarah listened intently, asking sharp questions that revealed her mother's quick mind. The smell of baking apples and cinnamon gradually filled the kitchen. Thomas found them there, heads bent together over shipping manifests Martha had drawn to illustrate a point about cargo distribution. "Something smells like heaven," he said from the doorway, his voice rough with memory. Sarah tensed, but then straightened. "It's Ma's recipe," she said proudly. "Martha, Mrs. Coleman, helped me make it. Did you know she once figured out how to ship fresh oysters all the way to Chicago?" Thomas's eyes met Martha's over their daughter's head, and there it was, that unguarded word in Sarah's speech. Our. Not quite acceptance, not yet, but a door cracking open to possibility. "Well now," Thomas said, settling into a kitchen chair. "That sounds like a story worth hearing." Outside, the first leaves were turning. Gold, nature's reminder that even the most steadfast things must sometimes change to remain strong. The storm clouds gathered over Silver Creek with unusual speed for late autumn, darkness rolling down from the mountains like spilled ink. Thomas stood at the weathered fence post, marking the ranch's north boundary, watching the sky with knowing eyes. "This'll be a bad one," he said to Martha, who'd ridden out with him to check on the herd. "Wind's got that feel to it." She'd learned to trust his weather sense over the past weeks, just as she'd learned the rhythm of ranch life. The perfect moment to bring him coffee while he worked on accounts, the way Sarah liked her eggs at breakfast, the thousand small details that had slowly transformed her from guest to something more. "We should warn Sarah," Martha said, already turning her horse. "She's out checking the far pasture." Thomas nodded, his face tightening with familiar worry. But before either could move, the first massive drops began to fall, and with them came the sound they'd been dreading, the panicked lowing of cattle. "Lightning must have spooked them," Thomas shouted over the rising wind. "They'll run straight for Hayes's new fence." They spurred their horses toward the sound, rain now falling in. Sheets. Martha's heart pounded as she followed Thomas's lead, remembering his lessons about cattle in storms. Panicked herds could destroy themselves against barriers, especially in territory they'd known as open range for generations. Through the curtain of rain, Martha caught glimpses of the cattle, dark shapes moving too fast, too chaotic. Thomas split left while she went right, trying to turn the herd before they reached the fence. Her horse responded beautifully to commands she'd practiced countless times, skills Thomas had patiently taught her coming to life when needed most. A flash of lightning illuminated a familiar figure ahead, Sarah already working to cut off the herd's dangerous path. The girl handled her horse with inherited skill, but she was one person against too many terrified animals. "Sarah!" Martha's cry was lost in a crack of thunder. Without thinking, she urged her horse forward, closing the gap. Years of business. Negotiations had taught her to act decisively in crisis. Now those instincts turned physical as she maneuvered through the storm. Together, she and Sarah managed to turn part of the herd, but the rest pushed on toward the fence. Thomas appeared out of the darkness, his horse sliding in the mud as he tried to reach the lead cattle. What happened next seemed to unfold in terrible slowness. Lightning struck a tree near the fence line, the cracked split of wood lost in thunder. Sarah's horse reared at the sound and flash, sending her tumbling. Martha saw Thomas's face transform with terror, the same expression he must have worn 11 years ago when another storm took his wife. But Martha was already moving. She reached Sarah first, pulling the girl up behind her on her saddle, while Thomas managed to turn the herd parallel to the fence line. The cattle, finally finding familiar ground, began to calm. "I'm fine," Sarah gasped, clinging to Martha. "Just winded. But my horse—" "Here." Thomas appeared beside them, leading Sarah's horse. The animal looked spooked but unharmed. They made it back to the ranch as the storm began to ease, all three soaked to the bone. In the barn, Sarah suddenly threw her arms around Martha, surprising them both. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, pulling back with embarrassment, "I mean for helping with the cattle." Martha smoothed the girl's wet hair back, a maternal gesture that felt natural despite its newness. "That's what family does," she said softly, then froze, realizing what she'd said. But Sarah didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at her father, who stood watching them with an unreadable expression. "Pa," she said carefully, "maybe it's time we cleared out the storage room." The guest house is awfully far to walk in bad weather. The weight of the suggestion hung in the air. Moving Martha into the main house would mean more than convenience. It would mean accepting her as part of their daily life, their family. Thomas stepped forward, taking both their hands in his work-roughened ones. "Sarah," he said gently, "your mother would want us to be happy." Sarah finished. "I've been thinking about it a lot, Pa. The way she always said love multiplies. It doesn't divide." She squeezed Martha's hand. "Besides, who else would teach me about shipping logistics?" Martha felt tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. Thomas's grip tightened on her fingers, and in his eyes she saw not the ghost of his first love, but the possibility of a second chance for all of them. Outside, the storm was passing, leaving behind the clean scent of rain-washed earth and new beginnings. The newspaper clipping fell from between the pages of Martha's account book as she unpacked her belongings in the main house. Sarah, helping to arrange Martha's things in the newly cleared storage room, picked it up before Martha could reach. "Coleman's shipping empire crumbles," Sarah read aloud, then looked up with widening eyes. "Martha Coleman, daughter of shipping magnate James Coleman, assumes control of remaining assets." She paused. "You ran the whole company." Martha sat heavily on the bed, Margaret's old hope chest now serving as a makeshift seat. "For a time, after Father's death, I tried to save what I could, managed to pay off the workers and small creditors, but," she smiled sadly, "sometimes success means knowing when to let go. Why didn't you tell us?" Sarah's voice held more curiosity than accusation. "About running such a large company. Would it have mattered that first day at the station?" Martha asked gently. "Sometimes people hear failed business and stop listening before they get to honest failure. Pa wouldn't have." Sarah sat beside her, the newspaper clipping careful in her hands. "He always says character shows in how you handle losing, not just winning. Your father is a wise man." "Who's a wise man?" Thomas appeared in the doorway, carrying another box of Martha's books. Sarah held up the clipping. "Did you know Martha saved 300 jobs by selling her own property first? It says so right here." Thomas set down the box, taking the article with careful hands. His eyes moved across the words, then found Martha's face. "This is why you understand so much about business, about Hayes's tactics." Martha nodded. "I've seen men like him before. They mistake kindness for weakness, honor for naivety." She straightened, her spine. "They're wrong. The way Hayes was wrong about Pa," Sarah added. "Martha, you should tell him about the railroad contracts, about how you negotiated with Sarah." Martha interrupted gently. "Those are your father's decisions to make." But Thomas was looking at her with new understanding. "No," he said quietly. "There are decisions now. If you're staying." The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Martha felt Sarah grow still beside her, holding her breath. "I'd like that," Martha said softly. "Very much." Thomas's smile was slow but sure, like sunrise over the mountains. Sarah's hand slipped into Martha's, squeezing tight. "Then we should talk about Hayes," Thomas said, pulling up the room's only chair, "and about how a woman who once managed shipping routes across the country might help a ranch survive a banker's schemes." They spent the evening planning, the three of them. Sarah brought up her mother's old ledgers, and for the first time, Thomas spoke of Margaret without pain, shadowing his words, remembering her business sense, her sharp mind, the way she'd built the ranch's systems that Martha now helped maintain. "You're not so different, you know," Sarah said suddenly. "You and Ma, not in the obvious ways, but in the important ones." She touched the newspaper clipping. "She would have done the same thing, sacrificed everything to save others." Martha felt tears threatening. "Sarah, I don't want to replace—" "You're not," Sarah said firmly. "Pa always said the heart grows bigger to hold more love. Like when I was born, it didn't make him love Ma less, just gave him more love to give." She looked down, suddenly shy. "Maybe it works that way for daughters, too." Thomas cleared his throat, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Martha," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I know this isn't the life you came west expecting to find." "No," she agreed, thinking of that lonely moment on the station platform that now felt like a lifetime ago. "It's better." Later, as darkness settled over the ranch, Martha stood at her new window, watching Thomas and Sarah walk to the barn for evening chores. Her fingers traced the newspaper clipping, not a reminder of failure now, but proof that endings, sometimes, led to better beginnings. From somewhere in the house, she heard the soft chime of Margaret's old clock marking the hour. The sound wasn't haunting anymore, but comforting, a reminder that time moved forward, carrying all of them into a future. None of them had expected, but all of them somehow had needed to find. The land deed lay between them on Thomas's desk, its edges worn soft with age. Martha traced the careful signature at the bottom, Thomas's father's name, written in fading ink nearly 40 years ago. "Hayes's offer is more than fair," Thomas admitted, his voice heavy. "Enough to clear our debts, buy a smaller spread closer to town." "But it's not about the money," Martha said, understanding in her bones what this land meant to the Reed family. "No." Thomas stood, moving to the window that overlooked fields his father had cleared by hand. "Every fence post, every barn board, they tell a story. My father's story, mine and Margaret's, Sarah's." He turned back to Martha. "And now yours." The warmth of belonging spread through her chest, but before she could respond, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Sarah's voice rang out, sharp with warning. "Pa! Mr. Hayes is coming, and he's brought his lawyers." Martha stood, smoothing her skirts, a gesture left over from her business days that made Thomas smile despite the tension. "Shall we greet them?" "Together." His hand found hers, rough palm against smooth. "Together." They stepped onto the porch just as Hayes and his party dismounted. Martha counted 4 men besides Hayes, 2 carrying briefcases that marked them as lawyers, 2 others with the hard eyes of hired muscle poorly disguised in Sunday suits. "Reed," Hayes nodded, then let his gaze slide dismissively over Martha. "Mrs. Coleman." "Still visiting, I see." "Mrs. Coleman is family," Sarah said firmly, coming to stand beside Martha. The girl's chin lifted in a gesture so like her father's that Martha's heart swelled. How unusual. Hayes's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But then, these are unusual. At times. The bank's board met this morning. I'm afraid they've decided to call in the entire loan." One of the lawyers stepped forward, extending papers. Martha saw Thomas's jaw tighten, but his voice remained steady. "The original terms give us another year." "Terms can change, Reed, especially when a property's value is in question." Hayes gestured expansively. "The railroad's coming. Silver. Creek's growing. This land's worth more than a struggling cattle operation. A operation that's shown 15% growth in the last quarter," Martha said quietly. Hayes's head snapped toward her. "I beg your pardon. The Double R's books," Martha continued, meeting his gaze. "They show significant improvement since implementing new contracts with the Abbott farm and restructuring the breeding program. The bank's own assessors confirmed the numbers last week. Numbers can be manipulated," one of the lawyers began, but Martha wasn't finished. "Like the numbers in your railroad deal." She felt Thomas and Sarah go still beside her. "It's interesting. The proposed route through. Reed Land would cut 10 miles off the railroad's journey, save them considerable money. Money they might be willing to share with someone who secured the right of way." Hayes's face darkened. "You're out of your depth, Mrs. Coleman." "No," Martha said softly. "I'm exactly where I belong. You see, Mr. Hayes, before I came west, I handled negotiations for one of the largest shipping companies on the eastern seaboard. I know how railroad companies think. And I know that they prefer dealing with stable, profitable ranches over speculative land grabs. Is that a threat?" Hayes stepped forward, but Thomas moved subtly, placing himself between Hayes and his family. "It's business," Martha replied. "The Double R's improved finances make any attempt to call in our loans look suspicious. especially given your position on the bank's board and your private interests in the railroad deal. The kind of thing that might interest banking regulators," Sarah added innocently. "I heard they're visiting next month for the territorial audit." Hayes studied them, calculation replacing anger in his eyes. Martha recognized the look, a businessman reassessing the odds. Finally, he nodded shortly. "Perhaps we can discuss a different arrangement, one that benefits everyone." He glanced at his lawyers. "More conventional loan terms, maybe even a partnership regarding the railroad right-of-way. We're willing to negotiate," Thomas said, "as equals." After Hayes and his men rode away, Sarah hugged Martha fiercely. "That was better than any dime novel." Thomas's arm slipped around Martha's waist, and she leaned into his strength. "Where did you learn about the banking regulators?" he asked. "Their daughter." Sarah grinned. "Remember those letters Martha's been helping me write? My pen pal's father works for the Territorial Banking Commission. She mentioned the audit schedule." Martha laughed. "Margaret taught you well about the value of information," she said without thinking, then caught herself. But Sarah just smiled. "She did," the girl agreed. "And now I have 2 mothers' worth of lessons to learn from." Thomas pressed a kiss to Martha's temple, right there on the porch in broad daylight. "Speaking of lessons," he said, "I believe I have one more document that needs attention." He drew an envelope from his pocket. "The marriage license application, if you're ready." Martha looked at the home she'd found, not just the ranch, but the family who'd claimed her. "More than ready," she said, and followed them inside, leaving Hayes's dust to settle in the yard behind them. The family Bible rested open on the kitchen table. Its pages turned to the record section, where generations of Reeds had documented their lives. Thomas stood looking down at it, one finger tracing the elegant script where Margaret had recorded. "Sarah's birth. She had such beautiful handwriting," he said softly. "Always said a person's signature was their promise to the world." Martha looked up from the contract drafts she was reviewing. The new agreement with Hayes that would secure the ranch's future. "Is that why you're hesitating to sign?" Thomas turned, surprised by her insight. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to those who love you." The words came naturally now. Their truth settled deep in her heart. Sarah appeared in the doorway, a smudge of dirt on her cheek from morning chores. "Pa's not used to winning without throwing a punch," she said with familiar directness. "Makes him itchy." "Sarah," Thomas warned, but there was a smile in his voice. "Well, it's true." The girl dropped into a chair beside Martha. "You always taught me that pride's the most expensive thing a person can own." Martha watched Thomas absorb their daughter's words. These quiet morning moments had become precious to her, the 3 of them finding their rhythm as a family, Margaret's memory a gentle presence rather than a barrier. "It's not just pride," Thomas finally admitted. "Hayes is right about one thing. The railroad's coming, change is coming. Part of me wants to face it the way my father would have, self-reliant, independent. And the other part," Martha prompted gently, "knows that's not the world Sarah's inheriting." He sat heavily at the table. "The West is changing. Maybe it's time the double R changed too." "But not alone," Sarah said firmly. "That's what Martha's been teaching us, isn't it? About partnerships and, what did you call it? Diversification," Martha supplied. "Using the railroads coming to our advantage, adding new revenue streams beyond cattle." Thomas nodded slowly. "My father would have hated it. All these contracts and negotiations." "Would he?" Martha asked. "A man who left everything he knew to build something new, who adapted to a land he'd never seen. Sounds to me like change was in his blood." "Just like it's in yours, Pa," Sarah added. "Remember when you switched to those new breeding stock everyone said wouldn't work? Or when you let Ma handle the books her way instead of the old system?" Thomas reached out, taking one of their hands in each of his. "When did my girls get so wise?" "Around the same time you got so stubborn," Sarah teased, then grew serious. "Pa, I've been thinking about the wedding." Martha felt Thomas tense slightly. They hadn't discussed details yet, the proposal still fresh as morning dew. "I want to carry Ma's Bible," Sarah continued. And I think Martha should write her name in the family records, not to replace Ma's writing, but beside it. Show how love grows. Martha blinked back tears as Thomas drew a shaky breath. Sarah, are you sure? Ma always said a family story is written in more than one hand. Sarah stood, reaching for the pen that lay beside the Bible. Besides, Martha's, already part of our story, has been since that day at the station. We just didn't know it yet. Thomas took the pen, studying it before offering it to Martha. She's right, about all of it. I've been holding so tight to the past, I nearly missed the future God set right. In front of me, Martha looked at the open Bible, at Margaret's graceful script recording births and deaths, joys and sorrows. With careful reverence, she wrote her name below Thomas's, her less elaborate but equally sincere handwriting adding a new chapter to the family story. Sarah leaned against her father, watching. Now you have to sign those contracts, Pa. Can't have your first act, after adding Martha to the family Bible, be breaking her business agreements. Thomas laughed, the sound free and unencumbered. No, I suppose not. He pulled the contracts closer. Though I still say breeding horses for the railroad seems a mighty strange way to run a cattle ranch. Diversification, Martha and Sarah said, together sharing a grin. Outside, the morning sun painted the mountains gold, the same mountains Thomas's father had seen so many years ago. They stood unchanged, yet the valley below them had transformed, just as the double R would transform, not by forgetting its past, but by building on its foundation. Martha watched Thomas sign his name with quiet confidence, and knew they would. Face whatever changes came the same way they faced everything now, together, their hands writing the future in their own unique script. The partnership agreement sat unsigned on the study desk while talk buzzed through Silver Creek like angry bees. Martha heard the whispers as she and Sarah loaded supplies into the wagon, speculation about her manipulations, doubts about Thomas's, judgment, criticism of their unconventional family arrangement. Don't let them bother you, Sarah said fiercely, hefting a sack of flour with more force than necessary. They're just mad because Hayes isn't getting his way. People fear change, Martha replied quietly, even when it's for the better. Then they're going to have quite a shock at Sunday services. Thomas's voice came from behind them. He'd walked up silently, a habit from years of working with skittish cattle. Reverend Parker just stopped by. He's agreed to perform the ceremony next week. Martha turned, searching his face. So soon? Unless you'd prefer to wait. There was no pressure. In his tone, only love and understanding. No, she said firmly. I'm ready if you are. Sarah's face lit up. Really? Next week? Then she frowned. But what about the dress and the Sarah Reed? Mrs. Abbott's voice carried across the street. The older woman hurried toward them, her usual stern expression softened by excitement. I just heard the news. Now about that wedding dress. I still have all my patterns from when I sewed for the Denver Mercantile. Martha, dear, you simply must let me help. Martha felt tears threaten. After their business deal over hay, Mrs. Abbott had become an unexpected ally. Now, watching the woman pull fabric samples from her bag, Martha recognized the gesture for what it was, community acceptance, one person at a time. That's mighty kind, Thomas said, his hand finding Martha's. We're planning something simple. Nonsense, Mrs. Abbott declared. Simple can still be elegant. Sarah, come help me measure. Your mother. I'm thinking deep blue silk to match her eyes. The casual way she said your mother made Sarah beam and Martha's heart swell. Before they could respond, more voices joined the conversation. Blue silk. Mrs. Chen from the laundry hurried over. I have perfect buttons for blue silk. My brother. Just sent from San Francisco. You'll need flowers. Miguel's wife Rosa called from her garden across the way. My roses are still blooming. Late season miracle, see? Thomas watched in amused bewilderment as their simple wedding plans expanded through the enthusiasm of neighbors. Yet Martha noticed he never let go of her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. Later that evening, as they reviewed the partnership agreement one final time, Martha voiced what had been niggling at her mind. "It's not just about Hayes anymore, is it? Or even the railroad?" Thomas looked up from the papers. "What do you mean?" "The way the town's coming together. Mrs. Abbott's dress patterns, Rosa's roses, even Mr. Chen offering to close the laundry. Early for the ceremony, they're choosing sides. Not just about Hayes and his plans, but about what kind of future they want for Silver Creek." Sarah, who'd been practicing her signature for the witness line, nodded thoughtfully. "Like when Mrs. Abbott started selling hay in town after our deal worked out. Or how Miguel's family is talking about expanding their garden since we proved local supplies can beat Wyoming prices." "You've given them more than just business strategies," Thomas said softly. "You've given them hope that they can stand their ground." "That bigger isn't always better." Martha touched the partnership agreement. "Speaking of standing ground, are you ready to sign?" Thomas picked up his pen, then paused. "You know, my father used to say a man's word was his bond. Didn't believe in all these written contracts," he smiled. "But he also said a wise man changes with the times while keeping his principles intact." He signed with a flourish, then handed the pen to Martha. As she added her own signature, Sarah leaned against her shoulder. "Does this mean I can start calling you Ma now? In public, I mean?" The girl's voice held both hope and hesitation. Martha set down the pen and turned to cup Sarah's face in her hands. "You can call me whatever feels right to your heart, whenever. You're ready?" "Good," Sarah said decisively, "because I already told Reverend Parker I want to stand with both my parents at the ceremony. He said family's what God puts together, not what people expect." Thomas pulled them both into his embrace. Outside, they could hear the evening sounds of Silver Creek, wagon wheels, distant laughter, the whistle of the afternoon train. The town was changing just as they were, finding its balance between tradition and progress. "Well then," Thomas said, "let's give them something worth standing up for." The bank notice arrived 3 days before the wedding, its official letterhead bearing the territorial seal. Martha felt its weight in her apron pocket as she worked beside Sarah in the garden, the two of them gathering Rosa's roses for the ceremony. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, proving once again how attuned she'd become to Martha's moods. "Is it Hayes?" Before Martha could answer, Thomas's voice called from the house. "Martha, Sarah, better come see this." They found him in the study, where Hayes himself stood flanked by his lawyers. The man's usual smooth confidence had an edge of desperation that Martha recognized from her business days, the look of someone making their final play. "As I was explaining to Reed," Hayes said, nodding coldly to Martha, "the Territorial Banking Commission has concerns about conflict of interest in the previous arrangement. They're requiring a full review of all recent contracts." Sarah's hand slipped into Martha's. "But the wedding, the wedding can proceed," Hayes smiled thinly. "Though I wonder what Reverend Parker would think about Mrs. Coleman's business history. The full story of Coleman Shipping's collapse makes for interesting reading." "That's enough," Thomas growled, but Martha squeezed his arm. "My father's company failed honestly, Mr. Hayes. Every creditor was paid, every worker compensated, even at the cost of our personal fortune." She met his gaze steadily. "The records are quite clear on that point." "Are yours?" Hayes's smile faltered slightly. "I don't take your meaning." "The Banking Commission," Martha continued calmly, "they're not just reviewing our contracts, are they? They're looking at all of Silver Creek's recent land deals, including those mysterious cash purchases of foreclosed properties." "You can't prove anything." "No," Sarah piped up, "but Mrs. Abbott's son at the land office keeps very detailed records. He's been quite helpful with our research." Thomas stepped forward. "This is your last warning, Hayes. Leave my family and this ranch alone." "Your family?" Hayes sneered. "A failed businessman's daughter and a child clinging to her dead mother's memory?" The words hung in the air like smoke before lightning. But before Thomas could react, Sarah spoke, her young voice steady and clear. "My mother taught me that character shows in how you treat others, not how big your bank account is. And Martha taught me that true strength is about building things up, not tearing them down. She lifted her chin. Maybe you should take notes, Mr. Hayes. Martha felt pride surge through her chest as Hayes's face reddened. Here was the proof of their family's bond, not in legal documents or business deals, but in the quiet courage of a girl who'd learned to let love multiply rather than divide. The commission arrives tomorrow, Martha said into the silence. They'll find the Double R's books in perfect order, our contracts legal and transparent. Will they find the same at your office, Mr. Hayes? Hayes looked between them. Thomas's quiet strength, Martha's steady resolve, Sarah's unflinching loyalty. Something shifted in his expression, calculation giving way to resignation. Perhaps, he said stiffly, we could discuss a revised arrangement, one that allows for mutual benefit. We're always open to fair business dealings, Martha replied, after the wedding. Later, after Hayes and his lawyers had gone, Thomas gathered Martha and Sarah into his arms. That was quite a show of force, my loves. Sarah grinned. We protected what's ours, like you taught us, Pa. Speaking of what's ours, Martha pulled the bank notice from her pocket. This came today. The commission's preliminary review is complete. They've approved all our contracts and... She paused, savoring the moment, recommended a full audit of Hayes's dealings. Thomas kissed her temple. Remind me never to play poker with you. Does this mean we can focus on the wedding now? Sarah asked. Because Mrs. Abbott brought over the dress. And Martha, just wait until you see it. Martha watched her daughter practically bounce with excitement, saw the love shining in Thomas's eyes, and knew that Hayes had never stood a chance. Not against ledgers and contracts, but against this. A family forged in trust and strengthened by challenges. Well, Thomas prompted. Ready to see your wedding dress? Martha looked at her family, the one she'd found when all hope seemed lost, the one she'd fought beside and for, the one that had chosen her as surely as she'd chosen them. Ready for everything, she said, and followed them upstairs to begin the next chapter of their story. The hand-carved box sat on Margaret's old dressing table, its wood gleaming with years of care. Sarah presented it to Martha with trembling hands the evening before the wedding. Pa made it for Ma when they first married, she explained. For her special things, I found it in the attic yesterday and... She hesitated. Well, I thought maybe you should have it now. Martha touched the box gently, understanding the magnitude of this gesture. Sarah, are you sure? Open it, Sarah urged. Softly. Inside, Martha found a carefully folded piece of paper. She recognized Margaret's elegant handwriting immediately. To the woman my Thomas might love after I'm gone, I write this letter knowing I might not survive this difficult pregnancy. If you're reading these words, it means you've found your way into my family's heart, and Sarah has deemed you worthy of this box. Love them well, love them fully, and know that you have my blessing to build your own happiness without the shadow of grief. With gratitude, Margaret Reed. Martha's vision blurred with tears. Sarah's hand slipped into hers. I found it last spring, the girl admitted, but I wasn't ready then. Wasn't sure if anyone could. She took a deep breath. But Ma knew, didn't she, that love grows. Your mother was very wise, Martha managed. So is mine. Sarah's voice was firm. Both of them. A floorboard creaked, and they turned to find Thomas in the doorway. His eyes went to the box, then to the letter in Martha's hands, understanding dawning in his expression. Margaret's last letter, he said quietly. I never knew. She knew you, Pa, Sarah said. Knew you'd need permission to be happy again. And she knew I'd need to be the one to give it. Thomas crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering them both in his arms. They stood there, holding each other, until Sarah pulled back with a watery laugh. Mrs. Abbott will have my head if we wrinkle Martha's wedding dress. She touched the blue silk hanging by the window. Though I still say you should wear the veil she offered. Martha shook her head, smiling. At my age, I think simple is better. Simple but elegant, Thomas said, quoting Mrs. Abbott's favorite phrase. His eyes met Martha's. like love that comes later in life, less flash, more substance. Speaking of substance, Sarah said, reaching into the box again, there's something else. She withdrew a small leather pouch. Mars pearls. Her mother's before that. She pressed them into Martha's hands. For tomorrow. Martha started to protest, but Sarah's expression stopped her. This wasn't just about jewelry. It was about legacy, about a daughter choosing to share her mother's memory rather than guard it. I'd be honored, Martha said softly. Thomas cleared his throat. I have something too. He withdrew a package from his vest pocket. Had Miguel's boy ride to Denver to fetch it. Inside the brown paper lay a delicate gold locket. When Martha opened it, she found a tiny photograph on one side, Sarah as she was now, and space on the other. Thought we could take a family portrait after the ceremony, Thomas explained. Complete the picture, so to speak. Sarah beamed. Perfect. And Martha, wait until you see what Rosa's done with the roses. She and Mrs. Chen worked all afternoon on the arrangements. Martha listened as Sarah chatted about wedding details, watched Thomas's gentle smile as he watched them both. The months since that lonely day at the station felt both long and fleeting. Time measured not in days, but in small moments of belonging. Tomorrow she would marry Thomas, officially become Sarah's mother, seal their family in the eyes of God and Silver Creek. But here, in this room with Margaret's box and blessing, Martha realized the true ceremony had already taken place in their hearts. I should go check on the roses, Sarah said finally. At the door she paused. Martha, thank you for seeing us, really seeing us, that day at the station. After she'd gone, Thomas took Martha's hands in his. Ready for tomorrow? Martha touched. The pearls, the locket, the letter that had waited years to give its blessing. I've been ready since the moment you offered me a ride from that platform. God works in mysterious ways, Thomas said softly. Yes, Martha agreed, thinking of all. The paths that had led them here. Paths of loss and hope, endings and beginnings. Yes, he certainly does. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with unusual clarity, as if the heavens themselves had polished every color to brightness. Martha stood at her window, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Margaret's pearls cool against her palm, their weight, both blessing and responsibility. A soft knock preceded Sarah's entrance. The girl was already dressed in her best blue skirt, her face glowing with excitement and something deeper. A peaceful certainty that warmed Martha's heart. Mrs. Abbott's. Here, Sarah announced, and Rosa and Mrs. Chen and half the ladies from church, I think. She paused, studying Martha's face. Are you nervous? A little, Martha admitted. Not about marrying your father, but about doing right by this family, by your mother's memory. Sarah crossed the room and took Martha's hands, pearls and all. Ma's memory isn't something fragile that needs protecting. It's more like, she considered, showing Margaret's gift for finding the right words, like a foundation, something to build on. The wisdom in her young voice brought tears to Martha's eyes. When did you get so grown up? Around the same time you taught me that? Loving someone new doesn't mean loving someone else less, Sarah smiled. Now come on, Mrs. Abbott's about to send out a search party. The next hour passed in a whirl of activity. The women of Silver Creek moved with practiced efficiency, turning Martha's simple room into a bride's sanctuary. Mrs. Abbott fussed with the blue silk dress, Rosa wove tiny roses into Sarah's hair, and Mrs. Chen made everyone laugh with tales of her own wedding day back in San Francisco. Through it all, Martha felt Margaret's presence, not as a ghost or competitor, but as a thread in the tapestry of love that had brought them all here. The pearls around her neck seemed to warm with each passing moment. There, Mrs. Abbott said finally, stepping back to survey her work. Simple but elegant, just as we planned. Martha turned to the mirror and caught her breath. The woman reflected. There wasn't young, but she was beautiful. Beautiful with life lived, lessons learned and love found in unexpected places. The blue silk complemented her eyes, just as Mrs. Abbott had promised, and Margaret's pearls gleamed softly at her throat. Pa's going to forget how to breathe, Sarah declared proudly. A knock at the door revealed Reverend Parker. Ladies, he smiled. The groom is getting rather anxious out there, and young Miguel says the roses won't last much longer in this heat. Mrs. Abbott shooed everyone out to make final preparations, leaving Martha alone with Sarah for a moment. Before we go down, Martha said softly, I want you to know something. Your father isn't the only one I'm committed to today. You and we're making our own promises too. Sarah's eyes welled up. I know, and I promise too. To be your daughter, not just in name but in heart. She touched the locket she wore. A mate to the one Thomas had given Martha. Family's what we choose, right? Right. Martha hugged her close, careful not to wrinkle either of their dresses. Ready? Sarah nodded, then reached into her pocket. One more thing. Pa asked me to give you this before the ceremony. She handed Martha a folded note. Martha recognized Thomas's strong, plain handwriting. My dearest Martha, when Margaret died, I thought my heart had learned all it could about love, but you showed me that the heart never stops learning, never stops growing. You came to us as a stranger and became our miracle, not by replacing what was lost, but by helping us build something new from the foundation of our grief. Today I marry you not just as my wife, but as the mother of my child, the partner in my dreams, and the proof that God's greatest gifts often come disguised as life's deepest challenges. I love you, my second chance, Thomas. Martha carefully folded the note, tucking it into her dress close to her heart. When she looked up, Sarah was watching her with knowing eyes. He spent all week working on that, the girl said. Made Miguel ride to 3 different towns looking for the right paper. A bell tolled softly, the church signal that it was time. Martha took one last look in the mirror, seeing not just herself, but the reflection of all that had brought her here. A rejected bride at a dusty station, a widower's quiet kindness, a daughter's growing trust, and love that had bloomed in life's autumn rather than its spring. Well, she said, taking Sarah's hand, shall we go show Silver Creek what a real family looks like? Sarah squeezed her fingers. We already have, Ma. We already have. The small church had never looked more beautiful. Its simple wooden walls transformed by Rosa's roses and the late morning light streaming through high windows. Martha paused in the doorway, Sarah's steady presence beside her, and found Thomas, waiting at the altar, his eyes fixed on them both, and in that moment, Martha understood they weren't just joining as husband and wife, but cementing what had already grown between them, a family built on choice rather than circumstance. The congregation stood, every pew filled with familiar faces. Even Hayes sat near the back, his expression unreadable, but his presence a tacit acknowledgement of their victory. Mrs. Abbott beamed from the front row, Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, and Miguel's entire family filled the left side with proud smiles. But it was Thomas's face that held Martha's attention as she and Sarah walked down the aisle together. He looked at them the way a man might look at a sunrise after the longest night, with wonder and gratitude and unshakable faith in new beginnings. Reverend Parker cleared his throat gently when they reached the altar. Who gives this woman to? Be married? Sarah stepped forward. I do, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. As her daughter. A murmur of approval rippled through the congregation. Martha saw Mrs. Abbott nod approvingly, and several other women wiped away tears. This wasn't just a bride being given away, it was a family declaring itself whole. Dearly beloved, Reverend Parker began, but then he departed from the traditional service. We gather today not just to unite 2 people in marriage, but to celebrate how love transforms and grows. Thomas and Martha have shown us that God's plans often surprise us, that family is more than blood, and that it's never too late for joy to bloom. Thomas took Martha's hands in his, and she felt the familiar strength in his gentle grip. They had chosen to write their own vows, another departure from tradition that felt right for their unique journey. Martha, Thomas's voice was steady but full of emotion. You came to our town as a stranger and became our miracle. You saw worth where others saw weakness, possibility where others saw problems, and family where others saw only loss. I promise to love you not just as my wife, but as the mother of my child, the partner in my dreams, and the proof that God's greatest gifts often wear unexpected faces. Martha's voice trembled slightly as she began her own vows. Thomas, you offered kindness when I needed it most, strength when I felt weakest, and love when I'd stopped believing in second chances. You and Sarah taught me that family isn't just born. It's built day by day, choice by choice. I promise to honor the past we both carry while building the future we choose together. Sarah stepped forward then, another departure from tradition that Reverend Parker had readily blessed. I promise too, she said, her young voice clear and strong, to be daughter to you both, to carry my mother's memories with pride, and to help write our family's new chapters with love. There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Reverend Parker continued the service. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation's response was immediate and joyful. But it was Sarah's beaming face that Martha saw first as Thomas kissed her, their daughter's happiness reflecting their own. The celebration spilled out onto the church steps, where Rosa and Mrs. Chen had arranged a feast that combined the best of Silver Creek's diverse community. Children played between the adults' legs. Miguel's wife started a song in Spanish that others quickly joined, and Mrs. Abbott presided over the food with proud satisfaction. "Look," Sarah whispered, pointing to where Hayes stood talking with Thomas. The two men shook hands, a gesture of peace, if not friendship, before Hayes tipped his hat to Martha and took his leave. "Some battles end better without victory or defeat," Martha said softly. "Just understanding." Thomas rejoined them, slipping an arm around Martha's waist. "Ready to head home, Mrs. Reed?" The name settled over her like a warm shawl. She looked at their gathered community, at Sarah's shining face, at the man who had seen her worth that first day at the station. "I've been home since the day you both. Let me into your hearts. This just makes it official." Sarah linked arms with them both. "Race you to the wagon. Mrs. Abbott said she packed us a special supper and I'm starving." As they walked toward their waiting wagon, Martha felt Margaret's pearls warm against her skin, a blessing from the past for the future they would build together. Above them, the afternoon sun painted Silver Creek in shades of promise, turning every weathered building and dusty street to gold. The rocking chair creaked gently on the front porch as Martha reviewed the ranch's latest contracts. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and winter was finally releasing its grip on Silver Creek. In the yard, Thomas and Sarah worked with a spirited young horse, part of their new breeding program for the railroad's expanding needs. "Keep your hands soft," Thomas called to Sarah. "Let her know you trust her to make the right choice." Martha smiled at the double meaning in his words. They'd raised Sarah that way too, with soft hands and trust, letting her find her balance. Between Margaret's memory and Martha's presence, the sound of approaching hooves drew their attention. Hayes rode up, but this time his visit carried none of the tension of previous encounters. The railroad's arrival had transformed Silver Creek, just as they'd predicted, but not in the way Hayes had originally planned. "Mrs. Reed," he nodded respectfully, "your latest proposal for the horse breeding contract, it's more ambitious than we discussed." "The territory's growing," Martha replied. "We believe in planning ahead. We've learned to trust her business instincts," Thomas added, joining them. On the porch, his hand settled naturally on Martha's shoulder, their matching wedding bands catching the spring sunlight. Hayes studied them both, then looked around at the flourishing ranch. The new stable gleamed with fresh paint. The expanded corrals held rows of premium stock, and in the distance, the railroad's regular whistle marked time like a heartbeat. "Silver Creek's changed," he said finally. "Some might say for the better." "Change isn't about better or worse," Sarah said, leading the young horse to the water trough. "It's about growing stronger by growing together." She grinned at Martha. "Someone wise taught me that." Hayes cleared his throat. Yes, well, about the contract, the board approves. We'd like to move forward as soon as possible. After he'd ridden away, Thomas helped Martha gather her papers. Remember when he tried to force us to sell? Now he's our biggest supporter at the bank. People can surprise you, Martha said, like a certain widower who offered a ride to a stranded woman. Or a mail-order bride who turned out to be a business genius, Sarah added, joining them. Oh, that reminds me. Guess who's coming to town? Remember Lucy, my pen pal from the banking commission? Her father's appointed Silver Creek as the new territorial banking center, and she's moving here. Martha exchanged a knowing look with Thomas. Their daughter had blossomed over the past months, growing into a young woman who combined Margaret's grace with her own emerging strength. Must be all those letters you two exchanged, Thomas teased. Plotting to remake the whole territory, were you? Just following Ma's example, Sarah said, the word flowing naturally now, both of them, making things better by believing they can be. Inside the house, Margaret's touches remained. Her photographs, her Bible, her recipes still marked in her elegant hand. But they were joined now by new memories. Martha's business ledgers, Sarah's drawings, Thomas's carved wooden boxes for them both. The home had grown, like their hearts, to hold both past and present. As evening approached, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. The same mountains that had witnessed their beginning at that dusty station now stood witness to their triumph, not just over haze or circumstance, but over the fear that love might be limited, joy rationed, family bounded by blood alone. I got a letter from James Miller today, Martha said quietly, the man who rejected me at the station. He's lost everything to bad investments, wanted to know if we'd consider hiring him. Thomas's arm tightened around her. What did you say? Offered him a job breaking horses, Sarah answered for her. Because that's what we do. We help people stand up again. Right, Ma? Martha touched Margaret's pearls, now a daily reminder of grace rather than grief. Right. And because sometimes the biggest blessings come from what looks like rejection. Speaking of blessings, Thomas said, Reverend Parker asked if you'd consider teaching a class on business at the church school. Says the children should learn from someone who understands both profit and providence. Martha looked at her family, the man who'd seen her worth, the daughter who'd chosen her heart, the life they'd built from love's second chances. I'd be honored, she said. After all, the best lessons are the ones we learn together. The evening. Train whistled in the distance, right on schedule. Sarah leaned against Martha's chair, Thomas held her hand, and together they watched night settle over their transformed world, their hearts as full as the circle of love that had brought them home. 1 year to the day after Martha stepped off the train at Silver Creek Station, 3 generations of women gathered in the ranch house kitchen. Sarah, now 18, mixed dough with her mother's sure hands, while Martha added notes to Margaret's recipe book, their different handwriting telling the story of a family's love across time. Through the window, they could see Thomas in the yard, teaching Lucy's younger brother the gentle way with horses that had become the Double R's trademark. The railroad brought new faces to Silver Creek daily, but the town's heart remained true, a place where second chances bloomed and family meant more than blood. Ready for the harvest social? Sarah asked, smoothing her apron. Mrs. Abbott says, your pies have gotten almost as good as Ma's. Martha smiled, touching the pearls at her throat. Almost is just perfect.